Good evening.
Why
This is
microdosing? What's
Adam
your
Sturch
primary
broadcasting from the
reason for
Mushroom
microdosing?
Mansion, Taos, New Mexico.
And so,
Working on
in
oil
there
painting
also,
Space
we
Mountain.
had, what are you microdosing and combining it with? Now, I've been popularizing
All
something called
right,
the
tonight
stack,
I
which
want to
is
put in
combination of
a
psilocybin
planet
mushrooms,
somewhere in
niacin and
heart
lion's
area
mane.
that's visible,
Psilocybin
Earth.
mushrooms contain
So I've got a little bit of earth tones mixed up, some green, some brown tones, a little bit of white, and a blue for the oceans. And then I think I'm going to use a thinned white and start lining in some figures populating the ocean, including either a shark or some kind of sea monster right in here under the star, and then a little boat right here and a couple departing the island. So here we go.
So we propose, in working with Roland Griffiths, to do a parallel study of psilocybin mushrooms versus psilocybin, the pure molecule. We're still working on that. So the stack became very popularized, and I chose niacin because I realized when you take niacin, you start to flush and you itch. So it excites your peripheral nervous system, and it excites your nerves. And then I realized that neuropathies oftentimes present themselves as a deadening of the fingertips and the toes. And psilocybin is a vasoconstrictor. Niacin is a vasodilator. And then lion's mane, there's 4 clinical trials that have been published. I populated a website for researchers and physicians at mushroomreferences.com. You can look all this up. And lion's mane has been shown to contain erinacines. These are compounds that stimulate the remyelination on the axons of nerves. And demyelination, amyloid plaques, etc., of course, have been implicated with Alzheimer's. So that was studied, and then this article came out also on alcohol use disorder. I think most of you all are familiar with that, and Stephen actually talked about it as well. So the majority of people are using a microdose, which is a low dose, and it's less than 0.1 grams. With we give 1 milligram of psilocybin. 1 gram of psilocybin is equivalent to 10 milligrams at 1%. So 1/10 of a gram psilocybin cubensis is 1 milligram. And the majority of people are in this low to medium dose. 88% of the respondents are truly in a microdose realm. So we did a follow-up report that was published in Scientific Reports in a Nature publication June 30th of this year. Now, our preliminary data, which has not been published, showed a strong decrease in anxiety and depression using the stack. We also saw it with psilocybin. The degree of significance was greater with the stack, but it gets into that fuzzy realm that it's so significantly reduced. And then the critics came out. Well, this is not a placebo-controlled study. Well, no shit, Sherlock. It's an observational study. People are not going to be motivated to microdose and then take a placebo, right? They're microdosing because they're taking the psilocybin. So it kind of blows our mind when some of these critics, they really didn't think through this very well. But a valid criticism that we accepted was expectancy. It's not placebo, it's expectancy. You're hoping that you have a benefit from microdosing, so you expect, because of the popularity of it, that you have a reduction in these symptoms. Indeed, we saw that. But in my dialogue with Dr. Pram Crisco, we helped co-design the microdose study. I was very sensitive to this concept of placebo or expectancy, and we both decided we need to get in a psychomotor test that's beyond expectancy. Not something that's subjective, but something you can actually physically demonstrate. Does psilocybin microdosing benefit people? And we zeroed in on the finger tapping test. It is used for Alzheimer's patients, Parkinson's patients, progressive dementia, traumatic brain injury. I have a friend whose husband fell off of a roof, hit his head, and she goes, yeah, they do the tap test. How many times you can tap your fingers in 10 seconds? When you're 22, you can do a lot faster than when you're 82. Because the sad fact of life is neurodegeneration. It's age-related and progressive over time. So the tapping test is a challenge test, and we ask it at the baseline. And admittedly, people get practiced initially for the first 3 times they do it, but they can hit a threshold of maximum. So the tapping test is been used, and there's well over 100 publications in the scientific literature, specifically related to neurodegeneration using this test. It's very convenient, it's arithmetically translatable, and when we got the results back, actually, I didn't get the results back. The statisticians on our team, Zach Walsh and Joey Rootman, being one of them, I got the message that we had some data back, we're kind of shocked by it, we don't want to share it with you until we acid test it. And so they did. They hit it with 3 different analytical systems of analysis, statistically, and the results came to be true. So I had no insight to this data whatsoever until the data was revealed. We published this in Nature June 30th of this year, and these are the results. Psilocybin in any form had no significant increase in the frequency and the cadence of tapping in 30 days with microdosing. But the combination of psilocybin and microdosing with niacin and lion's mane had an enormous effect. The p-value of significance is 0.004. That means there's 1 chance in 250. Actually, p-value is 0.001. But then they threw out some outliers and reduced it to 0.004. 1 chance in 250. That this is just noise. That this is not, a cause and effect relationship. So we saw that, wow, we have a psychomotor benefit that's outside of subjectivity, expectancy. There's no possible, talking to other statisticians, they twist themselves in pretzels trying to figure out how is it possible to have an expectancy benefit in 55-plus-year-olds, with expectancy with a tap test. So we thought, okay, we have something here. Now, the previous speaker talked about mechanism and modes of action. That's something we're really, really interested in. So we started looking at neuroreceptors. And we studied the literature. I have 10 full-time research scientists, 5 PhDs, who have also published on psilocybin in the scientific literature. And so I tasked them, okay, let's go ahead and let's dig into neuroreceptors. And so we went into a whole bunch of neuroreceptors, but the ones we really want to focus on are MAP kinases. There's track A, track B, and track C. And these code for neurogeneration. Basically, they're receptor proteins, which when there's binding affinity to it, stimulate nerve growth factors, or brain-derived neurotropic factors, or other ways of stimulating neuronal outgrowth, forking, and also helping atrophying nerves being able to become alive again, to regrow. We also looked at some other receptors that are related to neuroanti-inflammatories, JAK1s. So when we combine psilocin and niacin, we found synergy. Now synergy is beyond the cumulative additive effects. The individual components have some signal, the other component has another signal. The cumulative additive effect you see there is in red and blue. But the synergistic effect, in this case, of psilocin and niacin on track A is 4.8 and 6.4. So that's surprising, that's interesting, unexpected. So we then looked at lion's mane. Well, let's add lion's mane, psilocin, and niacin together. And we found something that was a new term of art for me. It's called maximum calculable value. It's when each of these components have no activity whatsoever, but the 3 of them strung together have massive synergy. And notice it is at the microdosing level. So this is down to 1/25th of a tenth of a gram. So we started looking at other things. We said, let's look at the psilocybin analogs. More psilocin than niacin on track A's. Again, maximum calculable value. No effect with psilocin at these concentrations, again at the microdosing levels. So then we looked at norvaocystin and niacin. All of these tryptamines are co-occurring in psilocybe cubensis that are being consumed. Again, we have a massive synergistic effect. Most exciting to me, digging into the literature, is psilocin and niacin on track B's. These code for stem cells that truly lead to neurogenesis, that differentiate in the hippocampus. And again, we have maximum calculable value. And then we look at iridacenes and psilocin on track C. And we also have massive synergy. So keep this in mind. These are multiple synergistic reactions that are occurring simultaneously that leads to neuroplasticity. Newborn neurons, new connections. So this is all at the microdosing level. A very popular, hard to call it popular, but increasingly prevailing belief with many physicians in Canada as a macrodose, followed by microdosing. Much in the same way that Roland Griffiths at Johns Hopkins also showed that 14 months after a high dose of psilocybin, the very act of re-remembering the experience was therapeutically beneficial. Now, when you re-remember, you are re-remembering using the new neurological pathways that were resident and coded that are resident within your memory. So the idea of microdosing as subsequent to macrodosing is you have a heavy, intense therapeutic dose of short with therapists, it's with good settings, etc. But then on microdosing, then you can revisit and refortify those neurological pathways. So we think we have found the mechanisms of action. Moreover, we've blown out neurons, brain neurons in vitro, and we see these similar results. We have several hundred now examples of synergism, several hundred. We have more than 50 examples of maximum calculable value with psilocybin and the tryptamines combined with niacin and or lion's mane. There are 11 studies at clinicaltrials.gov, Stephen Ross alluded to some of them, that use niacin as the active placebo, teaching 180 degrees from my idea, opposite. And I bring up to many of these clinicians who are co-authors and co-investigators who are looking at the peer-reviewed literature or involved in designing these studies. Is it ethical for you to give them an active placebo called niacin to someone who's severely depressed with treatment-resistant depression or other PTSD? When in 20 minutes they flush red, they itch, and they realize they've been tricked and they got the placebo? Aren't you exacerbating their depression? Not a single clinical study has addressed this question. What is the role of the physicians and what is the ethics of giving an active placebo to depressed or mentally ill people or challenged people when you are the cause of causing their depression to be greater because they feel that they didn't get psilocybin, they didn't get the medicine? No one's addressed this. I think niacin is a catalyst. It's a vasodilator. It amplifies the effects of psilocybin at microdosing levels. Moreover, and I'm only showing just a few slides, I have so much of this, we're very interested in neuro-anti-inflammatories. Because when you have cell growth, oftentimes it's associated most of the time with inflammation. This is what happens. They co-occur. So to have neuronal outgrowth or stimulation of newborn neurons coupled with neuro-anti-inflammatory effects is really interesting to us. And moreover, JAK1s also code for antiviral molecules. So an area obviously that we're looking into is COVID and brain fog, long haulers, and stay tuned. This is just the tip of the proverbial iceberg. I've spent literally hundreds and hundreds of hours on this subject. Many of you know we've been in stealth mode. I've been quiet. I let all these companies and the other people fight it out on Twitter. Friggin' embarrassing, children. Why don't you just call up the authors and have an intelligent adult conversation? But instead you throw spears at each other and then people get emotional. So what are delivery systems? Well, chocolate works great. The Aztecs taught us that. So I present to you that this stack, and I'm as surprised, as anyone, can help rejuvenate the nervous system as we progress with age-related neurodegeneration, with disease-induced neurodegeneration, viruses, with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, exposure to pesticides, other toxins. But think of this, that Homo sapiens are only 200,000 years old. We're a new species. I think it's time for us to evolve into a new species. psilocybin and psilocybin use for the commons, and microdosing, which is affordable and usable to everyone, which does not need you to be sitting in a clinic, could have an enormous impact for stimulating us to evolve into a new species. I'm proposing that new species, we go from Homo sapiens to Homo ascendus. It's time for us to ascend to being a new species. All of us, I believe, are inherently good. All of us here are striving to make society better. There has never been a time more critical in the evolution of human species fighting the challenges of climate change. When people are happier, they're more creative. When they're more creative, they're happier. When they're happier, they're more open-hearted, joining hands with their community, excited about the next day. And every day that I wake up, I'm excited to greet the morning. Because in the ether of being asleep, I'm cogitating and thinking about these and the impact. This could be the major stimulus for improving not only mental health, but to creating Einsteins that towards the end of their lives, they're coherent, they're intelligent, they're able to pass the torch of knowledge to the next generation. This is truly a time for a paradigm shift. I thank you for your attention.
Okay, so now we will do about a 15-minute Q&A with Paul. You'll have to be patient with me because there are a lot of questions on this app, so I'm going to try to scroll through and pick the best ones, but it's a little more chaotic than previous. But to start, actually, Paul, I'd like to ask a question. This topic of microdosing has been, as you know, a hot topic in the scientific community these days. It was a hot topic on the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board, a lot of debate back and forth about the therapeutic potential, a lot of recent articles that have been published on microdosing. And I love your app design and all of the rich data and information that's going into that. My question is if you have any thoughts on some of the recent placebo-controlled trials that have looked at microdosing in comparison with placebo and have found basically no difference between the groups.
Yeah, it's extraordinary that the people designing these microdosing studies are not studying microdosing. They're calling it microdosing. The one out of Brazil, I think, was 0.5 grams of psilocybin cubensis. And the ones that also been published by Imperial College and other groups, they have 2 microdosing sessions, 2 weeks apart. Not the James Fadiman protocol and mine that we're suggesting putatively are 3 to 5 times a week, 4 to 5 times per week. And not a single one of these studies are addressing, again, real-time use. You saw the surveys, this is what the majority of people were doing. And let me bring out one other point. The p-value of significance of 0.004 for the TAP test, think about all the confounders, especially you biostatisticians out there. Variability in the potency of the mushrooms, variability in the amount of niacin you're taking, variability in lion's mane. Those 3 confounders would dilute significance. So in fact, significance may be understated if we standardize them. But this is what's shocking to me, and that's why I'm an outlier. I'm self-employed, I can't be fired. So, and bless their hearts, these professors at universities, have to be very careful. They have very tight guardrails, and they're afraid, literally, academically afraid. So they tend to be ultra-conservative. But the fact they're disconnected from the microdosing community, and they publish articles on microdosing that are not related to microdosing as is being practiced, again, it's just mind-boggling. So we're looking forward to publishing some clinical studies, and we have one on Parkinson's designed for 2023, so we can narrow this down and refine it.
Amazing. Now, one last thing that I'm curious about more, I guess as a comment, but feel free to respond as well, is just about the finger tapping findings, which are astounding. There's that big of a significant difference there. I'm curious how that might correlate to
That's a great question.
Mood and other sorts of well-being and those kinds of outcome measures in combination combination with.
Yeah, we know that calcium is really important for the metabolism and production of psilocybin. Tremendous variability between the mushrooms, you know, from 0.1% to 2% in variability, strains and phenotypes. You know, it's a multifactorial equation. I see this as part of health as well. You know, the potency of the mushrooms, the potential therapeutic benefit, the outcome is a series of coefficient multipliers when multiplied together with all these other, you know, the microbiome and individual sensitivities, all that, the outcome of which is benefit or not. So this is something that needs to be disambiguated. This is why I propose, and Washington State's considering this very carefully, let's have a new metric for microdosing. Let's have a label not to exceed. What's the worst will happen? You won't get as much. You're not going to overdose. So if you stack it with ipecac, capsicum, niacin, 30 or 40 other adversives, people will take microdosing, and the standardization is not to exceed because psilocybin mushrooms degrade in time. There's a lot of efforts on stabilization, but if you have a not to exceed limit, then let the free market economy then gravitate to the producers and suppliers that are producing the best standardized products. So this is a new concept to a lot of physicians, but it makes a lot of sense to me. You're not going to overdose with a not to exceed, you know, on a microdosing label.
Yeah.
But again, I call out to Oregon. You know, I hope that Oregon officials here and people involved in this will revisit microdosing because frankly, it's economically impossible for low-income people to engage in a therapeutic session costing thousands of dollars. Okay.
I think what I'm hearing underneath all of this as a common thread is that, you know, effect aside, there's not harm that's being done. So why
Yeah.
not try it?
Right.
Because we might as well try something that could have an effect as opposed to restricting.
Yeah, but then
there's
the
no harm.
doctors, patients, communities, other people could say, well, this group of companies has really got their act together. This other group of companies, they're using 2-year-old cubensis they grew a whole bunch on, they're sitting on it, and now it's degraded substantially over time. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to some of the questions here. Let's see. More about microdosing. Regarding long-term microdosing and the concerns raised by FinFin, I'm curious if there has been recent light shed on the potential for heart valve damage.
Well, okay, I did a math on this. I think it's 1 out of 2,000ths of potential impact. Half-life is psilocybin is 2.5 hours. Fen-phen, I think, is over 24 hours. 2.5 hours, 2 hours, 1/500th the amount of psilocybin in your system compared to fen-phen. Then you look at the amount for microdosing, because the studies that have been put out where people are suggesting they're at, again, that minor dosing or macrodosing. People aren't macrodosing every day or minor dosing every day, they're microdosing. So you string out all these, and you look at each components where this exaggeration of harm potential, you have to really, again, I'm suspect. Has the academics, are they just up there on the stage in their podium, hey, myself, I'm subject to the same criticism, they're pushing a point of view without giving you the accurate information. Because when you look at the half-life, the concentrations, and then you look at, just because it does bind to the 5-HT2B receptor, what does it do on the other side of that cell? And there's some great examples of that already in the scientific literature. Just because you have binding affinities doesn't mean it's going to result in heart valve arrhythmia and damage. So again, I would just, any of you out there, please look at fen-phen, look at the concentrations, look at the binding affinities, look at the binding affinities with psilocin, look at the concentrations, and do the math. It is extraordinarily over-exaggerated in my opinion. Okay?
Thank you. A couple more questions, but one thing I forgot to mention before we started the Q&A, just to remind everyone that Paul will be signing copies of his book after this Q&A is over, and that there are copies available for sale out in the lobby. So, okay, a couple more questions.
Sure.
What is the impact of the stack when taking clinical or heroic doses? Somebody wants to know.
I don't know.
Any thoughts?
I think it should be explored, but I don't know. Good question.
Do you have any specific suggestions for how we might move the ball forward for legalizing microdosing in Oregon? I know that's a really big question, but curious to hear your
Well,
thoughts.
I'm not familiar enough, and then when I recommended to Washington State that make sure we have an exit ramp for novel research, innovations, for medical doctors who may come up with a new idea that does not restrict them from developing this idea to have to pass a new measure. And unfortunately, from my reading of Oregon, you do not have that without having another ballot initiative. And so I think unfortunately my voice was not listened to. You know, I thought I had really good arguments for this, and for whatever reason, I was put on the back burner. And maybe I'm too forceful in my opinion, I don't know.
There were a lot of opinions being shared, I think, in that whole process, and
Yeah.
some were heard and some were not, and it might be a mystery as to how that
That's the
came to
way,
be.
that's the way it is.
Let's see. There's a question here about niacin. If non-flushing niacin is used, is the benefit of niacin lost in the stack?
Good question, we're exploring that. We do have information on that, which right now I'm not ready to reveal, but non-flushing form of niacin is not a vasodilator. So the idea of vasodilation, you get more of the neurodegenerative benefits of the psilocybin and psilocybin tryptamines that are going specifically to the endpoints of the peripheral nervous system for benefit. So the flushing form of niacin has benefits of vasodilation, and that tingling you feel is the excitement of the endpoints of your peripheral nervous system. So I feel that the flushing form of niacin adds more benefits, and then it becomes an aversive. Because if you try to take 10 times or 20 times as much, and any of you have done 500 milligrams of niacin, you know, and you had a microdosing at 50 milligrams, we just begin to flush for most people. The adverse event of taking a high dose of niacin would be a great deterrent, like antabuse is to alcoholics. So there's about 4 or 5 reasons. Also, nicotinic acid is a strong anti-inflammatory, which is interesting as well, and has been implicated in high doses for helping people with depression. So there's about 6 different reasons why nicotinic acid, niacin, is better than nicotinamides. Okay?
It's definitely fascinating.
Yeah.
The piece about niacin as a catalyst. I'm curious
Yeah.
to see your results when you
Yeah.
come up with those.
Well, we have 4 papers that are in various stages of publications. We call them white papers that I've done internally. And so we will be submitting 2 to 3 papers per year now that I have 10 full-time research scientists on board. And it's a really exciting time for us.
Awesome. That is exciting. 10
Yeah.
full-time research scientists.
Yeah, 10 full-time research scientists. That's all they do.
Just about ran us out of the clock here. Hold on
Okay, a
one
couple
second,
more.
wash
Someone
these
is
out.
wondering, could you compare the benefits of a protocol with macrodose followed by microdose
Yeah, I think
versus the other way around?
There's macrodose well, you could do it both ways, I'm sure. But I think that
Actually, I'm going to pick up the second take and embellish the blue a little bit as well. So, take 2 coming up. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm pretty satisfied with the way those little figures look, but I would like to deepen up the ocean. So I'm going to feather or blend deep ultramarine and lake blue toward the lighter edges and lighten, make it lighter as it approaches the edges of the objects. So they'll be reverse ordered. There we go.
ESR.
Is that, am I understanding it correctly?
Well, let me background it. The question relates to an incident told about in both my book with Dennis, Invisible Landscape, and in True Hallucination, creatively agitated under the influence of mushrooms, announced that he could do something, which is very hard to describe what it was. It was sort of like turn himself inside out, trigger the end of the world, open a doorway into hyperspace, something like that. Anyway, some highly touted, dramatic thing. He organized an experiment to test the theory, and the result of the experiment was not nothing, which was what I was betting on, not what he said would happen, which what he was betting on, but a very peculiar incident then was generated where he seemed to lose his mind, to put it simply, for about 3 weeks, but in a very specialized and orderly way. And I seemed to also undergo a parallel but different kind of transformation. And the theory that was being manipulated was a theory that involved using vocally produced tones to acoustically cancel metabolizing psychedelic molecules in the body so that they would bond as dimers into DNA. In other words, so that they would intercalate into DNA. The hypothesis which lied behind all this was that DNA must be the storage, the physical storage site for memory. This is not a popular idea. This is a sneered at idea. But memory is a great problem for modern science. We've decoded DNA, we've got the top quark, we've measured the core temperature of Betelgeuse. We have no idea how memory works. It's absolutely confounding because a woman, a man of 90 years old can remember the way their great-grandmother's skirts smelled when they used to crawl up into her lap when they were 4 years old. It was 86 years ago. During that time, every molecule in the body has been cycled out every 5 to 7 years. So it's 10 bodies away is the body that crawled up into that woman's lap and could smell the starch in her skirts, and yet the memory is completely clear. Where are the memories? And as you know, experiments have been done with ablating large parts of the brain or studying people who are the unfortunate victims of very traumatic head injuries. And there are cases in the medical literature of people who have fully 80% of their physical brain destroyed and no memory impairment whatsoever. So where are the memories? Well, there are a number of theories, but there is nothing more than theory at this point. Dennett said, let's assume nature is conservative for a moment. We know that nature stores protein codes in DNA, and we know that DNA has large silent portions. And in fact, some of you may have seen the data which came out just recently, that those large silent portions of the DNA exhibit the same mathematical properties as language. Did you all read this? Oh, this is hot news, folks. As you know, DNA codes for protein. That code is only about 6% of the DNA chain. The rest of the DNA, the other 94%, is called silent DNA, or by some people, junk DNA, because it doesn't code for protein. So what does it do? Well, recently they've been sequencing this junk DNA and then studying it with algorithms used by the CIA to detect code in noise. And they discovered that the silent portions of the DNA fit all the necessary criterion of language. They have syntactical structure. This seems to support Dennis's contention, which was, and it's would be very controversial, you see, because it's a Lamarckian mechanism. It's saying that experience can modify nuclear DNA, which is denied by anti-Lamarckian evolution. That's not the way it's supposed to work, according to Darwin and the neo-Darwinians. Nevertheless, if we don't believe that the only part of the body which is not traded out many times over the course of a long lifetime, the only part of the body which you are born with and die with is neural DNA. Neural DNA, what you're born with, you keep. Therefore, it's reasonable, following good scientific method, to hypothesize that the neural DNA must be where the memories are. Well, then Dennis's idea was that ordinary experience has to do with serotonin dropping into a relationship of bonding with DNA and giving off a signal like a radio transmitter of the structural hyperfine ESR of the DNA, and that then constitutes the electrobiochemical foundation of the experience of thought. And so what he was saying was then what these psychedelics are is they're like different kinds of transmitters, stronger, or transmitting in different wavelengths, or transmitting with a higher bandwidth. And it is known, in fact, that these psychedelic molecules do compete with serotonin. They are serotonergic competitors. So visualize the DNA in the course of metabolism unfolding and folding itself to expose various runs of nucleotides to ribosomal coding into RNA. And in this molecular environment, these drug molecules are whirling around, and by Brownian motion or by enzymatic delivery, the details don't matter, these molecules intercalate, meaning they slip neatly between the nucleotides. Many drugs do this. This is known. But most drugs or compounds, when they intercalate into DNA, they distort the twisting of it, and it's dysfunctional. It messes up. The thing can't transcript anymore. These drug molecules, if you look at them, they're usually a pentexyl five-sided central group with two benzene rings, or a benzene ring and a partial benzene ring hanging off of this thing. And they're flat, they're planar. It means if you could blow up a psilocybin molecule to the size of a cutting board, it would be about as thin as a cutting board, and as wide and as long. Those flat molecules fit right in between the nucleotides. Yes, and when this happens, the electron spin resonance signal is amplified, just as though a more efficient transceiver had been dropped into place. And you can measure the hyperfine ESR signature of DNA in an in vitro laboratory situation. This is not mysterious. So the idea then is that we have a family of molecules, endogenous neurotransmitters like serotonin, acetylcholine, so forth and so on, and exogenous neurotransmitters like psilocybin, psilocybin, mescaline, and then exogenous, endogenous like DMT, found inside and outside the body. And it may be that what the evolution of consciousness is the slow trading in of low-gain molecular transceivers like serotonin for much more broadband, high-gain molecular transceivers like DMT. So Dennis's idea was to take all this theory that I just laid out and then use acoustically produced vocal sound to cancel the charge of these molecules. And as you probably know, or maybe you don't know, when a molecule becomes superconducting, it will bond into anything. It becomes a hyper-bonding molecule. It will bond anywhere. So theoretically, if you could cause psychedelic molecules during their act of being intercalated into your genetic material to become superconducting, even for a moment, they would lock in permanently. And you would begin to have a very deep, a much deeper experience of consciousness. It would be much broader, much deeper. He claimed he could do this, but he also went further and claimed, and this is where I...
All right, that still needs a lot of work, but I think that's it for the moment.
I didn't understand it then, and I don't understand it now. But he claimed that in the act of becoming superconducting and intercalating, this thing would cause the molecule to undergo something which he named. He called it dextrorotary
that gets a couple
rotation.
About to get on this boat, it looks like.
Turn inside out, and he
It gets
said
kind of a
then that he would
sharkish
produce
sea monster happening over here in between the island and the star.
the strangeness
And
of
that
the
gets
concept, but that you
pretty
could,
nice
in
little
some sense,
earth
give birth
happening
to
there.
your
A
own
little wonky,
soul.
but it's okay.
That
And a
something
little
could be generated
star
out
on
of
the
your
mind,
body,
or
which
sun
you
on the
would
mind.
have a high degree of
So
personal
I think that does it for the moment. Thank you for watching. That's Adam
because
Sturch,
it would, in fact,
broadcasting
be
from the Mushroom Mansion Taos, New Mexico, working on oil
It would
painting
be- he made analogies
Space
to
Mountain.
the Philosopher's Stone, to the flying saucer,
Have a good night, Earth.
to the birth of an idea. It's